Nani, it's great to have you on the show today. Thank you again for joining us.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So I would like to ask you right away about your current title, your background. What's your process? What was your career like to end up becoming the VP of ABM at Demandbase?
Yeah. So my career has actually mostly been in B2B marketing. My entire career has been at a couple of different companies. And over the course of my career, I've explored a lot of different areas of marketing. I've been in product marketing, in demand gen, in marketing operations for a pretty significant chunk of time. Did some content marketing as well. And today I own the account-based marketing team at Demandbase. And so what that means for us, because we're an account-based marketing company, is that it's really about having a point of view on what account-based marketing is and sort of evangelizing that internally and externally, both through kind of the overall approach to account-based marketing, but frankly, delving into broadly into B2B marketing, but also kind of specifically how that gets factored into using our own solutions and products. So that's kind of what my team is tasked with today.
And you have been at Demandbase for now over 6 years. So how did you see the company changing? And obviously your role changes significantly. How do you see that path of Demandbase becoming what it is today?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And frankly, the past, 6+ years at Demandbase have been quite the adventure. At the outset, when I came to join the company, frankly, we weren't even talking about ABM at all. In fact, I remember there was a debate about whether it was going to be, TAM, like a target account marketing, but everyone already knew that as total addressable market. So I remember those discussions kind of around the concept of ABM at all. So from my perspective, I think the most exciting transition, in the first, year or two at Demandbase was really beginning to develop a category, right? And I think that a lot of marketers had been practicing ABM for quite some time, frankly, decades, right? That we had been executing some of the best practices or strategies that were ABM, but to define a new category, this new ABM category, was tremendously exciting. So that was definitely a big turning point for the company. In the first kind of few years that I was a part of the company. It had been around much longer than that. But then being able to see as well just shifts in the focus of the company overall to make sure that we've really got every part of the customer journey addressed, from identifying target accounts to attracting them and engaging with them, converting them, and of course, my favorite part personally, measuring them. So seeing that kind of all come together was a really fascinating part of the company's journey as well.
And there is a lot of debate, obviously, around ABM and what it means. And I heard a lot of different opinions of the people that are more purist about ABM, that you have to really target one single account at a time, versus those that practice more the vertical marketing or targeting a specific niche. How do you see ABM, and how does Demandbase fits into this profile?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that is near and dear to my heart. So I take a more inclusive approach to ABM, and frankly, I understand when people kind of say, "Well, isn't that B2B marketing?" And in some ways, it is, right? It's good, smart, focused B2B marketing is really what account-based marketing is all about. So I do know that there are folks who, to your point, that the quote unquote purists, right, that talk about the real ABM only being one-to-one ABM. In my view, the beauty of account-based marketing as it can be practiced today is that you can scale that one-to-one approach to a one-to-few and one-to-many approach as well. And so whereas in the past, right, and I talked a little bit about, ABM has been around for decades, you can always have a one-to-one plan for accounts if you have the resources available, right? But beyond that, how do you scale that out? How do you create that same level of engagement, that same level of personalization and sort of VIP touch and attention to accounts in the hundreds and thousands rather than sort of more in the dozens? And that's where technology comes into play, right? You can't have that scaled ABM unless you've got technology to back it up. And that's the world that we're living in today. And so to me, because we've had these advancements in technology, we can now expand the definition of account-based marketing to include more than one-to-one. And we actually spend a lot of time thinking about this, this sort of blended approach to ABM, where you've got, yes, one-to-one accounts that are going to be a part of your strategy, but there are also those one-to-few accounts and one-to-many, right? And even all of those are still a subset of your total addressable market, right? So you're still being very focused on only high value accounts that you want to proactively put resources against.
But does it always make sense to personalize at the account level for everyone? Or when do you kind of draw the line of saying, okay, this level of personalization is enough for this segment of accounts?
Yeah, it's a great question. It depends, right? So there are certainly, rules of thumb, there are certain verticals. So I'll point out things like financial services, not huge fans of personalizing at the individual account level, right? There's companies that are very focused on security, may find it disconcerting to see their individual account name called out, even if it's done in totally privacy secured ways. So we've learned that over time. The other thing I would say is, certain elements, like as you're moving sort of up the pyramid of personalization, make more sense. So for example, your customers might be much more comfortable with being called out because you do have a relationship with them, right? So they want to be exposed to content that really makes sense for the situation that they're in, the solutions that they have, the solutions that they don't have. They want to get that tailored experience. They shouldn't be treated like strangers. So that's kind of a simple differentiation to think through. And then the other thing I would say is it all comes down to testing. So find out whether an increased level of personalization is making an impact in a certain segment or not, and try it out. Because it may be, to your point, that you get to some degree or some level where it just doesn't make sense. And frankly, if you don't have a differentiated message, personalization doesn't make sense. So for example, if you have decided that you want to split apart different verticals, right? If you don't have a different message or different, you don't necessarily need different content, like different content assets, but if you don't have a different point of view or a different approach or a different thing to say based on that segmentation, it's probably not worth the extra time and effort that you're putting into it. So I always talk about that, right? Because we have the flexibility and the freedom to segment our target account list in infinite ways. And some of them are stupid, right? Some of them just don't make sense. You could segment based off of whether the headquarters of the target accounts, are glass or metal, but that wouldn't make sense unless you're selling glass or metal, right? That wouldn't make sense for the software solution you might be selling them, because there's not a different message or a different approach based on that segmentation.
And another part of ABM is obviously it's very, or at least is perceived to be very resource intensive. How is your team structured today now that you are a VP of ABM?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we've got a little bit of a different flavor because my account-based marketing team is focused on that more evangelizing ABM and educating around ABM and defining ABM strategy, both internally and externally. We work very, very closely with our growth marketing team, who is doing the actual execution of integrated ABM campaigns. So the way that we're structured right now, I've got customer education, customer strategy on my team. And then importantly, I do have ABM operations on my team. And that's where we're laying the groundwork, the sort of foundation for our ABM approach. And I cannot emphasize enough how critical that component of an ABM strategy is, right? So our ABM operations team is responsible for defining our target account list that we call our DB4K. It's responsible for defining the segmentation strategy beyond that, right? So how do we get to those one-to-few, one-to-one sort of tiered approach to ABM? How do we differentiate customers, verticals, whatever it might be? And very importantly as well, my team is also responsible for the measurement, the performance metrics that go along with our ABM strategy. So in that way, we're very much in the weeds of an ABM strategy internally. I would say for most marketing teams, they probably also would have an execution element within their ABM team who are actually running those campaigns. Because Demandbase is basically exclusively an ABM company, you could argue our whole marketing team is really our ABM team. And so in order to sort of execute something end to end, we're involving other members of the team.
Do you think this is something that even an early stage company can execute? And if yes, what kind of people, what kind of roles do they have to hire for in order to be able to execute this strategy?
Absolutely. In fact, I would argue that ABM is the place to start. It makes so much more sense than taking a broad-based sort of spray and pray approach. I would advise any company, particularly companies as they're resource strapped, that they frankly have to be even more disciplined than anyone else about making sure that they're using their resources against the accounts that can and should buy from them, right? And so whereas it might be tempting to get a broad message out and to plaster the world in whatever you can, ultimately the reality of being a B2B company is that you don't need your message everywhere. You don't need it exposed to the entire universe. And so, and as an early stage company, you have to be extra careful about not wasting any resources on people or accounts that can't buy from you. So I'd say actually sort of the opposite, that ABM should not be considered an advanced level of marketing, but really should be the foundation of any B2B marketing strategy. Just kind of defining your beyond, again, that total addressable market, what's your target market, right? Who not only who can sell to you, but who should, or not only who can you sell to, but who should you be selling to as a starting point. And then making sure that you're in lockstep with your sales org in terms of bringing in those accounts that are going to be highly valuable to the company overall.
So ABM is often, compared with inbound marketing, which is kind of seen as it was the previous trend, let's call it that way, when Marketo and HubSpot came out in 2006. What place do you think inbound marketing has in the overall strategy today?
I do think that inbound marketing still has a role to play. And I think that being open and receptive to inbound interest is important. That being said, I think the benefit of having an ABM strategy and approach is around prioritization. So understanding what to do with that inbound interest and how to quickly sort through what's worth the time and the follow-up by an individual sales rep, for example, or an SDR. That's the value that you're bringing to the table. So we don't necessarily have any issue with inbound coming in that's even outside of our target account list, but we do have a different level of expectation both on follow-up and on additional resources that we would put against those accounts, right? So if you think about ABM, one very important element is to understand that the firmographic, technographic reality of the accounts that you should be selling to is unchanging, and then the behavioral and intent data that you can factor into that gets layered on top of it rather than the reverse. So what I mean is, it's not just because an account or an individual is showing wild interest in your company doesn't mean that you should sell to them, right? It might mean that they're doing a research project. It might mean that they're, a tiny company that's ultimately going to churn because they can't afford you. And so not getting too caught up in our sort of temptation as marketers to say, oh, look at all this interest that we drew in. It's really about qualified interest and making sure that the first slice that we take is this a target account or not? And if it's not, we've got a different workflow and a different set of very limited, if any, resources that would go into those accounts. So I think that for me is the real benefit. And that approach has to go through not just marketing, but also into sales. So in our case, we've got the majority of our SDR team focused on our target account list, and they essentially have, in some ways, kind of a patch like an AE would, right? They've got a territory and named accounts that they're going to be following up on inbound, and that they would be going after outbound. We have a smaller group of SDRs that are tasked with sorting through inbound interest that's from non-target accounts and determining whether they do meet the qualification standards to continue, right? Because as we know, time is our most precious resource. And so what we don't want to do is start, frankly, bothering sales with inquiries from accounts that aren't right for them, that aren't going to be able to close.
I agree 100% on this. I see too many companies still today where their scoring is too skewed towards the interest and the behavior of a prospect and account versus the actual qualification. Is that an account that you want to have as a customer? Is that an ideal account?
Exactly. And frankly, we had, in all transparency, made that error ourselves, right? And I think the advent of, with intent data in particular hitting the scene, there was so much excitement around being able to identify accounts at the earliest stages of research that we sort of forgot momentarily how important it was, to your point, to make sure that these were still meeting the minimum threshold of qualification first, that came first. And understanding intent after that is very important and helpful. But if they're not qualified accounts or they don't meet our criteria, then we don't want to be going after them.
And so to perform this kind of activities and to execute on the strategy, what kind of tech stack do you have internally, or what do you recommend? Obviously, I assume Demandbase is one.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I have to say Demandbase is, and that is where we're getting our sources of data. So the intent data that we're putting in. It's also how we think about, for me, from a foundational standpoint, I lean on Demandbase for both determining our audiences, meaning groups of accounts that we might be either incorporating into specific campaigns or delivering specific messages to, or just measuring against, right? So having a view into our entire target account list. And then it's also where we're thinking about our measurement at the end of the day. So those two elements we lean heavily on Demandbase for. Other parts of the tech stack, obviously CRM or Salesforce users are, that's foundational to everything. And that's really how we communicate and work with sales, and kind of where our source of truth on the business and revenue side of things is coming from. So I'd say CRM is still very important for us. Marketing automation as well is something that we still lean on. It's been a little, back and forth on how marketing automation is viewed and kind of going forward and into the future as we're becoming, leaning in so much to account-based, but marketing automation, definitely an important part of our tech stack as well. The other thing that I would say has been really helpful from an ABM approach is having a lead to account matching functionality in the tech stack. So in our case, we use lean data, and it's so unsexy in a lot of ways to lead to account matching. It just is bleh. But it's so critical to understand, to your point, when we get that inbound interest, the worst possible thing that could happen is that we have an inbound inquiry from a target account and we're unable to map it because it's new and we can't find the account and link it to it. So for us, being able to understand at any time what kind of level of interest we're getting from our target accounts is totally critical to our business, because the fact is we've got a more narrow scope than broad B2B, quote unquote, typical demand gen approaches. So we're by design sort of narrowing our field of vision onto these high quality accounts, but that means we can't afford to let any of them slip through the cracks.
And to your point, that lead to account matching becomes super crucial when you try to measure the performance, right, of your campaigns, because if you're not able to then report back at the account level, then you might have some gaps there.
Exactly. Yes. So those are, frankly, that's even one layer deeper into our sort of measurement. So I think of probably 3 different layers of engagement. We'll just call it broadly engagement. So at the very top layer, there's account level engagement data that includes even anonymous website visits, say, right? So what are our target accounts doing on our site? Are they, aware of researching there? They may or may not have ever filled out a form, in which case we don't know who that individual is, but we can still identify the account, right? So that's sort of the highest level. You could argue you could go even higher, think about intent, offsite intent as well. But in our case, it's okay, how many of our target accounts are actually making it to our website? And then one click down, which is what you're kind of talking about, is okay, how many of those are converting on the site, right? How many of those are filling out forms? And it's important at that juncture to make sure that none of them are sort of remaining as leads, or at least leads that are not attached to accounts, so we can understand what percentage of our target account list in a given quarter is engaging with our actual campaigns, right? Downloading white papers, coming to webinars, going to events if we still had them, things like that. And then beyond that, and maybe this is the one where really our team has it's all sort of in service of this. This is where the rubber meets the road, is pipeline, right? So what kind of pipeline are we able to develop, and how are we able to think about the impact that our marketing campaigns are having on pipeline generation, again, in a given quarter and over the course of the year?
And talking about pipeline and metrics, what are the KPIs that you measure that are important from an ABM perspective? And also, how do you then track attribution for the pipeline generation?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, our core KPI, I would say the thing that we're most honed in on is pipeline. And I do want to sort of talk about that one as being super critical. One of the things that has been really powerful for us as we've developed our own ABM strategy is making sure that our pipeline goal is precisely the same as the sales team's pipeline goal. So we go through an exercise where we look at the sales team's quotas, collective quotas, and make sure we waterfall backwards into the amount of pipeline that it's going to take for them to meet their quotas. And we do that based off of the average deal size, the funnel velocity, meaning, some pipeline that we're generating this quarter is actually going to be about deals closing next quarter or the following quarter or 3 quarters out. And then the close rates as well, right? So what percentage of these pipeline opportunities are actually going to close? So we develop those, and actually it is my team, the ABM operations team, that would be developing the pipeline goals for a given quarter that are shared across marketing and sales. That's super, super critical, because what we don't want to do as a company, and I do think that this is good for an ABM strategy, but also just for alignment and not getting into sort of attribution warfare, we don't differentiate between marketing and sales quote unquote generated opportunities. From our perspective, we don't have an e-commerce option. So every opportunity is generated by sales when you think about it, right? Whether or not it was influenced or impacted or touched by marketing. And what we don't want to do is end up in a situation where marketing is meeting its goals and sales isn't, right? So we sign on for that entire pipeline goal every quarter, and collectively as a team need to reach that. When we layer on top of that, okay, what percent of those opportunities should be influenced by different marketing campaigns, that's the sort of second level of granularity where we get into that. So pipeline, super, super critical. The other thing, and I had mentioned this a little bit, is overall engagement with our target accounts. So in our case, if we want to talk specifics, we have a target account list of about 4,000 accounts. And in a given quarter, we want to make sure that we're getting engagement with, meaning engagement with an actual marketing campaign, membership in a Salesforce campaign, from 1,600 of those accounts. And that's based on the amount of pipeline, again, we need to generate, because about 75% of our pipeline comes from our target account list. So a lot kind of factoring into that, but engagement overall. And the reason that one's critical for us is because it's a good gut check on whether that pipeline goal is going to be able to be met, right? So if our pipeline goal is, say, 500, and our engagement goal is only 800, well, that means they're going to have to convert an awfully huge percentage of those engaged accounts into pipeline opportunities, and that can be a sort of red flag or alarm bell. So we want to make sure as a marketing team that we're delivering what we need to, and driving engagement with those accounts to warm them up for sales. So those are kind of two critical ones. Last thing I did want to just touch on is attribution. And I think that is frankly an area that leaves a lot to be desired. And I think that there is value in trying to sort of piece apart which individual channels are contributing to what revenue dollars. But right now the models are relatively problematic. And so my general point of view is that we like to approach things from that sort of holistic account-based approach. So when we run campaigns, almost always they're going to be integrated campaigns anyway, right? We rarely want to run a campaign that's a single channel in a vacuum. Even if we do something like, say, direct mail, a direct mail campaign might be sort of the final piece, the grand ta-da, the thing with the bow around it at the sort of end of the day, but there are emails associated with it, there are webinars that might accompany it, there's advertising that's going out, there's personalization on the website, all related around the same messaging topic or theme, often the same creative and look and feel. It's a really truly integrated multi-channel campaign. And what that means is that we want to take that cohort of accounts that are receiving that, say there's 500 accounts that are a part of that campaign, and I want to understand where those, how that overall campaign is impacting those 500 accounts and their sort of closeness to becoming customers. And then being able to do comparisons, whether that's against a baseline or against accounts that didn't receive that treatment, because I want to talk about incremental changes that were incremental, the sort of incremental difference that we're making on that cohort. So rather than saying, you know, if we think about those 500 accounts, at the end of the campaign, we can turn around, or maybe 3 months after the campaign, we turn around and we say, okay, you know, there were 500 accounts in that campaign and 100 of them became customers. That would be great. What does that mean, right? Is that, would that have happened anyway? Like, are we taking credit for all of them? Are we saying 0 accounts would have closed? So rather than just saying, okay, 100 of them closed, ta-da, we want to be able to compare that cohort to a different group of accounts that didn't receive that multi-channel integrated campaign. And so it's a different set of firmographically identical, you know, 500 accounts, and maybe 20 of them closed, right? And so what we can say is, well, that means the accounts that were a part of this campaign were 5 times more likely to close, rather than saying, oh, 100 closed in a vacuum, right? We can talk about that incremental difference. It's much more helpful language than trying to sort of assign credit or blame, I suppose, to any one channel or any one campaign, etc.
And you mentioned direct mail into your kind of multi-channel strategy. What do you think the role is of direct mail today in 2020, and why do you think it's effective?
Yeah, I mean, 2020 is quite the year. I will say, and this is total credit to a woman on my team, Delaney Kutzall, who is an absolute whiz when it comes to direct mail. We've had to pivot really, really significantly in a couple of different ways, right? So the reality is we can't send direct mail to offices right now because very few people are there. So whereas before we had relied pretty heavily on these quarterly, relatively large sends. It might be in that 500 range, right? Or we're sending something really nice to net new prospects of ours, and it might be a bottle of wine, it might be a Bluetooth headphone, something that's quite like kind of a, almost like a shocking, like, wow, that landed on my desk type of a direct mail campaign. Now that we are in a world where people are working from home, 2 major shifts have had to happen. One, obviously shifting to e-gifting, right, made a lot of sense for us. So being able to deliver things digitally via email, right, gift cards, things like that are a safer route when you don't have an address. What that has done is enabled us, actually, the sort of cost per send is much, much lower. The conversion rates are lower as well, but it's more, way more, as it turns out, way more than made up for in terms of the overall efficiency, dollars in, dollars out. So that's actually been a happy conclusion, or a sort of happy realization for us, is that being able to send the higher volume relatively easily of these e-gifts has relieve some of the pressure off of the need to convert a huge percentage of the bigger physical sends. One note on that was really fascinating for us is, and this is a little bit technical and in the weeds, sort of, but with e-gifting to net new prospects, right? So imagining that this is outbound by an SDR who is trying to get attention from a prospect who's unfamiliar with our brand, the e-gift itself needs to be a familiar brand. Otherwise, you're coming at them with two things, right? You're coming at them with, they've never heard of Demandbase Say before, and they've never heard of whatever it is that you're offering them. It comes off as a scam. So safest for those net new prospects is to keep it brands that they already know. Make it Starbucks or Amazon or Uber, whatever, right? Like things that they are familiar with, so they're not sort of double whammied into two unfamiliar brands. It was like a little thing, but really critical. And then the other thing is we've actually now begun to spin back up the big physical sends, but we're using them for a different segment of our account. So whereas before they would be used for pipeline generation, now it's about either pipeline acceleration or customer retention. They have to be kind of with people that we know, that we're in communication with, because frankly, we're asking them for a home address, right? Now, the fact that that data goes into a vacuum and never gets seen again and is all very safe and secure doesn't really matter. You're still entering in your home address somewhere to get that physical direct mail sent to you. So those ones need to be with people that we already are deeply engaged with, and that we're sort of building and strengthening relationships with. So a little bit of a shift in strategy, but ultimately I'm kind of thrilled with how well and how quickly we've pivoted our direct mail approach this year.
And so my last question here in 30 seconds, can you talk to us about the relationship with the SDR and sales team, and how do you keep that alignment that is necessary for ABM?
It is the most critical part of an ABM strategy is creating and retaining that relationship with sales and the SDR team. Couple of different things that we've got going on with our SDR team. I would say that campaign owners are extremely close with SDRs overall, right? Like daily communications with individuals, checking in on things back and forth. They've got a real in-depth day-to-day relationship. We also have more formalized marketing and SDR meetings on a more like a monthly cadence. One thing that's helpful just tactically there is that we use that as an opportunity to shine a spotlight on SDRs that have done a really good job, right? Or have found a new or creative way of leveraging a certain type of campaign. So for example, in our last one, we had an SDR talk about how they were leveraging e-gifting, and they get to share that with each other. And it's very helpful for our marketing team also to hear what's working and what's not, to maintain that. With sales, I think that one of the things that's most helpful for us, we to this day, and this has been all 6+ years that I've been at Demandbase, this meeting has existed, but we have actually a weekly marketing and sales management meeting that we meet every Friday. It's called our Funnel Working Group, and we use that. It's run by ABM Operations, so on my team, and we use that as an opportunity to review where we are first and foremost against our pipeline goals for a given quarter, which is sort of that meeting point between marketing and sales. But that spins off into all sorts of important conversations around, breaking that down. Is it particular parts of the business that have a healthy pipeline or unhealthy pipeline? What's broken, who and what and how are we going to fix things? So that is a really healthy kind of relationship to maintain there, or way of maintaining that relationship. And then the last point I would make is, no matter how advanced or far you are into an account-based strategy or just your B2B strategy in general, it needs to be a continuous cycle with the sales org. Like it has to be continually nurtured, particularly now that we're all at home and separate from each other. So be sure that you're in constant communication with sales about what you're doing to support them and getting feedback from them about what's working and what's not, and looking to the data to help reinforce and inform what it is that you're doing going forward. So that is really important because it's easy to see those relationships kind of fizzle out, again, particularly when we're apart from each other.
Nani, it was fantastic having you as a guest on the episode today. I truly enjoyed the conversation. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much.